Yo, what is up everyone, back here with another video. In today's video, we're going to be going over the top 10 best Scarlet and Violet Pokemon, in my personal opinion. Obviously, it is early in the format, so things can change around as the format progresses. If you guys enjoy these kind of videos, make sure to like and subscribe, support the channel. Make sure to check me out on Patreon as well if you guys enjoy these videos, you would like to support me. And also make sure to check out coaching if you guys would like to be coached into being some of the best VGC players when this format comes out. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so just one note before we get, obviously before we continue with the list, I just want to let you guys know that I will not be ordering these Pokemon in terms of like number 1 and then number 10, just because I think it's too early to do that, but I will be talking about the 10 that I think are the best right now or have the most potential. You'll also notice that there is going to be a variety between their roles and their typings. That's mostly intentional because I want to make sure that we're covering a wide variety of Pokemon, because for a meta to function, you don't have 10 attackers at the top of usage. You usually have a mix, right? Of supporters, weather control, a bunch of other factors. So that's also going to be factored into this as well. So you could almost treat it as like me guessing what the top 10 is going to be when the format comes out. So not even guessing, like educated guess. But basically, I'm going to start with a very tried and true favorite that a lot of people like, Garchomp. So Garchomp's a really strong Pokemon. I think it's especially benefits from terrestrialization. And the reason why it benefits from terrestrialization is because it can terrestrialize into its ground type and get a really powerful earthquake off. And that damage just like really adds up. And Garchomp has really good base stats all around. It has pretty decent bulk. So changing into solo type actually removes some of its weaknesses. It does give it a grass weakness, but that's not really that big of a deal. Overall, like Garchomp's a huge, like it really benefits from terrestrialization, and that's like a really nice thing for it. Also too, there are multiple sets you can run on it. So the main set that like I would probably think of would be like a Life Orb Earthquake set, and the main reason for this is just you get as much damage as possible, you still have all your coverage. But there are some other potential options that you can go with Garchomp, right? Clear Amulet's also a really good item that allows it to basically ignore stat drops. And you can pair this with Rock Slide, Earthquake, Swords Dance, and pretty much get like a really beefy Swords Dance that can't be stopped with like Intimidate from Arcanine, for example. That being said, this thing would still be susceptible to Will-O-Wisp, which is why I think the Life Orb set might be a bit better. But overall, Garchomp is a very strong Pokemon, and I could definitely see it benefiting really like well off of the ground type terrestrialization. So that was the first one I wanted to talk about. Next up, so this is gonna be another dragon. I talked about this a lot in the previous tier list video. I think Roaring Moon is a really strong Pokemon. Now, obviously, it does have its flaws. It does have a very low defense stat, but because of how fast it is and how high its attack is, it's just so incredibly like difficult to absorb damage from. And I think that there are two sets that this thing can utilize that can really benefit it. The first one is without sun support, and the second one is with, because obviously there are going to be some cases where you want to use these Paradox Pokemon without necessarily having to activate their abilities through weather, right? It restricts your building. So I have two sets here that I want to go over that I think are potentially really strong for this thing. So first off, is it terrestrializing into a flying type? Now, I think this could be particularly good because combined with the booster energy item that gives it its ability, it removes its item essentially, right? And that gives you a really strong acrobatics, and you could pair that with Dragon Claw and Dragon Dance, and you essentially have like a mini Salamence, sorry, let me put Dragon Claw here. You essentially have like a mini Salamence Mega. So let me actually pull up Salamence Mega just so you guys can see the like it compared. So Double Edge was its strongest coverage with 120 base power, right? It had usually it ran just multiple flying moves, Dragon Dance, and then it was either Roost or something else. For the sake of like comparing them, we'll just put Dragon Claw. So obviously Salamence with the Mega does have like a little bit higher stats all around. But Roaring Moon anyways does have a higher base HP and base special defense. It just compromises its defense a lot more. And also it does get overall like stronger damage because of photosynthesis, right? So its overall damage is increased. So over Mega Salamence, it's dealing like way more damage basically with its ability activated. Now the drawback is obviously you lose some bulk, you have a different typing, but if you terrestrialize into flying type with acrobatics, you have a base 110 stab flying acrobatics with Salamence. It makes you able to deal damage to the powerful grass types like Brute Bonnet, Amoonguss. You know, obviously strong acrobatics just does a lot to a lot of Pokemon, and you change your typing to flying, which is actually really good for the resistances to what Salamence's original typing is. It resists the fighting type moves that's normally weak to. It resists the oh my god, I'm forgetting the type. I think it's bug. Yeah, it's bug. That's what it is. Bug, and yeah, pretty much it just can resist those two types. And realistically, to hit it with the super effective move, ice is obviously consistent into it, but like electric moves aren't consistent because you could just stay your same type, which is fine. And this isn't its only use, right? The other use that I've seen for this Mon that I think is really good that I've actually been messing around with is Choice Band, and it's Choice Band with Dragon Claw, Iron Head, Crunch, U-Turn. And pretty much what this does is it just lets Salamence go really crazy with its attack stat. Now, obviously, you'd probably want to pair this with Torkoal or some kind of Sunsetter, because then you would get more damage. But the amount of damage that Band, like, Jolly Mence does, or, like, Roaring Moon, I should say. I keep calling it Salamence, but, I mean, it basically is a Salamence, right? But what it, like, Roaring Moon does is insane. Like, it does so much damage. And the fact that you can turn into a steel type with this thing actually gives you like some checks into opposing threats that normally would pressure you. So for example, Fluttermane, which is the new Mismagius, like the really buffed one, Paradox Pokemon, you can actually check it now because you can actually just literally terrestrialize into steel type and just a steel type Iron Head absolutely nuke it, right? You can deal with a lot of your threats. Even Tyranitar, which would be kind of annoying for this thing to remove, you literally turn yourself into a Terra Steel type and you can beat it. Opposing dragons, same thing. Opposing ice type, same thing. So you guys can kind of see where it's going with that. And I think both these sets have a lot of potential. I just think that the band set might be better on some teams particularly. And then the booster energy acrobatic set might be better on some general teams that want to include Salamence, but don't want to go down the sun route. So to me, like, that's kind of the main distinction between the two sets. So next up, the Mon I want to talk about, speaking of sun, so Brute Bonnet is a really strong Pokemon in this format. It's obviously another photosynthesis user, so it's another one of the Paradox Pokemon. Now, what's really cool about, you know, Brute Bonnet is it's pretty much a buff Amoonguss. So I talked about this in the previous video as well, but pretty much, like, it does everything Amoonguss does better stat-wise, and it can put on a lot more pressure. But what I think people do is they think just because it's a basically upgraded Amoonguss, that's the only way you can use it. So obviously you can go with the standard Rage Powder, Spore, Protect. You can even go Crunch or Sucker Punch, whatever you prefer, on the Amoonguss, and you can go like Citrus Berry or something, right? And I've seen a lot of people do this, even Akaberry, right, to be able to take hits. But I actually think there's a lot of untouched potential with this Pokemon. And I think that actually if you forego the redirection aspect of it, this thing is just opponent attacker in general, and you can actually really take advantage of that and just still have fast Spore, right? So it's actually really like strong in terms of what it can accomplish because it's still hitting things for a lot of damage because of that attack stat. It's still going super fast to outspeed like the slow mons and just put them to sleep. And on top of that, you have a Sash, which allows you to take even the strongest hits that you wouldn't be able to live anyways if you were bulky, right? Because there are some hits that are like that, even for Brute Bonnet. And to me, I think this just gives it a lot of potential, and I think it's something worth exploring. Now, that being said, I still think the Rage Powder set's very good. I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't be using Rage Powder, but I do think the ability to drop Rage Powder is something that people shouldn't overlook and is actually really cool. So yeah. Moving on to the next one. This one's a pretty safe bet for being a really consistent Pokemon in any regional decks, and it's Arcanine. Arcanine is the best Intimidator in this format, like no contest. Incineroar is not in the deck, so that automatically gives it a really strong, you know, role as a Fire-type Intimidator with Will-O-Wisp to shut down physical attackers. Combined with the, obviously, Clear Amulet being added, which is the item that prevents you from being intimidated, Will-O-Wisp has a lot more importance now, so that makes the Arcanine even better, if anything. And you just get like a lot of options with Arcanine, which I think is incredibly nice, and it's something that I would expect to continue to be good. The one thing that holds Arcanine back sometimes is if it's caught out of position, it can be very frail and just get kind of sniped by like a really like hard, super effective move. So you have to be cautious how you position it, but it is so splashable, I think, on a lot of teams that it will be consistent enough where you will see it on majority of teams in VGC. Similar to like how you would see Incineroar, just probably not to the same exact degree. But besides that, you'd probably go with the safe like Mago Berry set that just goes for, you know, obviously Will-O-Wisp. You go for Flare Blitz if you want to for some damage, but you're mostly using your support moves in Will-O-Wisp and Snarl, and then you have your Berry for recovery. But overall, Arcanine, really safe option, really good at utilizing its toolkit to be defensive and help out other teams, so that's why it's on the list. So Gyarados is a pretty straightforward one. Gyarados also is really good for its Intimidate. It's also actually in a pretty decent role in terms of dealing with the metagame. You would typically probably pair this with a Berry as well. Now, the nice thing is it gets access to Dragon Dance and Protect. What Gyarados has as an option that's really cool that this format has given it is Terra Blast. Now, Terra Blast can be used in two ways with Gyarados. It can be used with Flying, or it can be used with Grass. Now, Grass allows you to hit opposing water stronger. It lost Power Whip, so this is actually a really important tool for it to have. Or Flying for strong neutral damage, and this also just lets you remove like your 4 times weakness to Electric, right? You actually lose pretty much all of your weaknesses that you had with this type, or not all of them, but you lose a lot of them, right? So overall, I think it's pretty important for Gyarados to be able to potentially change into a Terra Flying type. And I think that being able to change into even a Terra Grass type, you can completely counteract all your weaknesses, because everything Grass is weak to, Gyarados pretty much like resists, right? So Bug, Water Flying resists that. If you think about Fire, Water Flying resists that. You know, you think about opposing Flying, okay, well, that's not something that that's not something that it necessarily resists, but it's still neutral, right? So all these moves that would be clicked in the Gyarados usually are going to be of the super effective variety that Grass can just kind of take advantage of and punish them for a turn. Obviously, Flying is probably the safer of the two if you're just trying to have a consistent option that always clicks, the reliable move, but the Grass option is kind of cute if you're utilizing it in certain scenarios where it can help. All right, so next up, and this one purely gets this spot because of how many good Sun abusers there are. I just want to clarify that. This literally is just a Pokemon that is brought into even more relevancy, literally just because of like how many good Pokemon have this photosynthesis ability. So obviously we're talking about Torkoal here. So Torkoal is really, really strong, and that's mostly because it can pretty much set the ideal weather condition for a lot of these Paradox Pokemon, which are already powerful, and beef them up and give them more damage or better stats, whatever they're, boosting. And the reason why this is really good is because, Torkoal can freely swap weather in and out. And because it's so slow, it can pretty much just like always guaranteed get the weather up if you put it first. And you can kind of cycle out with it, with some of the other Pokemon. You have U-Turn, you have these other pivoting moves that pair really nicely with Torkoal. And also, too, it also has Iron Defense Body Press, which you can leverage as well into certain teams to kind of act as like this endgame option to kind of pressure your opponent or force them to be more proactive. As well, even if you wanted to use it as a support Pokemon, you could literally just go with the Body Press Yawn set as well. And for the first time, I think ever, Heat Rock is potentially a viable item for Torkoal, because having a longer sun is actually way more likely now, considering that rain is not really at the same level of usage as it was in previous formats, and it's kind of nerfed. That being said, or like I say nerfed as in like it doesn't really have that many good Pokemon using it. That being said, when you do encounter a rain team, like obviously you'd probably want a different item than Heat Rock. It's just more so that like Heat Rock is now more so an option on Torkoal. You could also go with like a bulky Citrus Berry set, which is used on a lot of teams. You can go with obviously Shuka Berry, Pasho Berry, like whatever you prefer, but probably like Citrus or Heat Rock would be the ideal sets. But yeah. Really strong Sunsetter. You can also use it offensively in Trick Room, although I would advise caution with this because right now hard Trick Room teams are kind of having trouble breaking through some of the new legendaries that are added. But you can use this in Trick Room, especially next to something like a Rangaroo and Shrek, could be very powerful. So, next Pokemon, and I think Tyranitar, so I talked about this in my last video, how I was really unconvinced on it being good. I literally think just because of how good Sun is, it gives Tyranitar some kind of usage in this format as weather disruption. And also too, like this could theoretically be taken by the other Sandsetter, Hippowdon, but I think right now Tyranitar still is a better kit for this. That being said, Tyranitar is like, it seems like it's struggling a little bit, but I think it might like improve a little bit as the meta kind of stabilizes. So I feel like Tyranitar being in top 10 is a pretty safe bet, or at least it'll be in the top 15. And that's just because of its weather changing ability. It's just super nice. And with terrestrialization, you get to remove its extra like weaknesses from dark. So you can kind of like benefit a lot with this mon, as long as you position it properly. And it is very rewarding into opposing Sun teams because you can just turn off their weather, right? And that can really ruin like some Pokemon on their team. So to me, like I would definitely keep an eye out for Tyranitar. I still think Tyranitar is a valid enough threat where you should be keeping it in mind with your team building, but I don't think it's as prominent as it necessarily was before. So you do get a little bit of leeway with that. So going over our list so far: Garchomp, Roaring Moon, Brute Bonnet, Arcanine, Gyarados, Tyranitar, Torkoal. So you guys notice we have 3 more slots left. And you guys notice that this is different than the tier list in terms of the top stuff. Now, the tier list, I think, is looking at things in a vacuum in terms of how they are as an individual Pokemon and somewhat how they function in the metagame. But I think that when we're looking at this list as well, I did mention that I wanted to prioritize diversification of roles and also focusing on like different kinds of Pokemon that can accomplish different things. So you'll notice, like, even in how we structured it, these two Pokemon are really strong breakers. This is a really strong redirection option and a sleep option. These two are really strong intimidate options. These two are really strong weather options. So you guys can kind of see the trends there. So next up, I wanted to talk about Sylveon, and the reason why I wanted to talk about Sylveon and I wanted to bring it up a bit more is I actually think it has a lot of potential in this format. It did lose Mystical Fire, which was kind of a bummer for it, but because it gets access to Terra Blast and you can terrestrialize it into a fire type, it can actually do some work, right? Normally the things that would check Sylveon, like Steels, you can Terra Blast with the fire type coverage and just absolutely demolish it, right? It still has the bulky leftover set with Calm Mind, which can make it really, really threatening to a lot of offensive special threats. I think because the new legendaries, if you guys don't know, there are new legendaries. They're pretty much all dark type. I'll just get an example of one. So Chien-Pao is an example of one, but Ting Lu's probably another good example. They are all like really strong, or at least like have some kind of niche in the format, and Sylveon has a really good like niche as well of being able to deal with a lot of those Pokemon as well. There's a lot of dragon types and not much respect for fairy right now, and that's literally because there just aren't that many fairy types that can be utilized. But I do expect Sylveon to be like one of those like higher tier fairies, as long as you're able to utilize it well and position it well. So it's definitely something I would keep an eye out for and be aware of going into the format. So it's just a cool option. Theoretically, it could run a spec set as well. I'm not the most convinced on that specifically. I would probably stick more towards the Calm Mind set, but obviously we'll see as time progresses. Okay, so next mon I want to talk about is Iron Hands. So this is actually the first of the Quark Drive and the only of the Quark Drive Pokemon I'll actually be talking about. And the reason for this is honestly, it's like one of the only Quark Drive Pokemon that are just so good at like stat wise that they don't care that you have to commit an item to pretty much boosting it only once. And the reason why I say this is if you look at Hariyama's attack, right, it is 140 base attack, right? You have this thing like Brave Nature, for example, right? Like this is uncharted levels of damage that you're experiencing. Base HP already good, base defense already good. You invest a little bit into special defense, this is very, very decent special defense, right? So it already has incredibly good bulk, really strong damage, booster energy, boosts its attack. It absolutely demolishes some things with coverage. And when you terrestrialize this into a fighting type, I've literally Terra fighting with Hariyama, with this specific Hariyama, Iron Hands, and I've done 77% to like a defensive Bold Amoonguss. So like this thing has incredible amounts of damage. I think it has so much potential in Trick Room specifically, but obviously having access to Fake Out, Close Combat, Wild Charge, like these are all really, really good options. And then Protect's a really safe option as your last, right? So this Pokemon is something I would definitely keep an eye out for, and I think is incredibly, incredibly strong. I think it is, there's a reason why it's the only Paradox Pokemon that I'm mentioning that is not with the Photosynthesis ability, and it's because of how consistently strong it can be without needing its, its Electric Terrain set. And that's a problem that a lot of the other future Paradox Pokemon struggle with, is that they kind of want the boost from the, either booster energy or electric terrain, and that kind of holds them back. So, final Pokemon I want to talk about, Scizor. So Scizor is a really, really important Pokemon, I think, in this format. If you guys look even at the Pokemon that I said I think will be good, Scizor is good in the Garchomp. It's good in the Roaring Moon. It's good in the Brute Bonnet. It's obviously not good in the Arcanine. Gyarados probably not. It's good into Tyranitar. It's good in the Sylveon. It loses to Torkoal. It is kind of neutral to Hariyama, but probably loses to it because it resists. But think about that, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4 things beat it out of our top 10 list. And 5 are weak to it. So it's literally essentially beating like 5 of the biggest threats, in my opinion, obviously, in the metagame, right? Now, obviously, there's terrestrializing, all this other stuff that can be played around with to obviously have certain matchups flipped. So, for example, Sylveon terrestrializing into fire type, hitting this. Tyranitar doesn't really terrestrialize into anything that changes that. This can change into steel type, but if you run close combat on Scizor, you're fine. So anyways, Scizor is a really good user of 2 specific items. Clear Amulet is 1. This just lets it pretty much stat boost in front of anything it wants. and it literally can't be intimidated, which is huge. This is insane for Scizor, and it lets it do so much more. The fact that it also picked up close combat as well is phenomenal for it, because it can do like so much more work with the tools it's given. So even if we look at like its stats, right? First off, decent bulk all around, right? You can theoretically like even invest more into attack if you want to here. But even if you put a little bit in special defense, like it can be pretty specially tanky, right? If you decided you wanted to put it full into attack, that's fine. You're doing a bunch of damage anyways. That's really, really threatening to the opponent, and they have to respect that, right? Along with that, obviously it has Technician, which just powers up its Bullet Punch anyways. So you Swords Dance up, you're doing insane amounts of damage with this Bullet Punch. You can't be intimidated anymore because of Clear Amulet. The only thing that can stop you is a burn, but you can usually play around that. Plus, you don't want to be in front of an Arcanine, right? Most of the time, I'll Flare Blitz you anyways. And you have Close Combat to catch any potential swaps that you think will try and swap into Bullet Punch, right? I think this is an incredibly good kit. The fact that it can also terrestrialize into a Steel type for Steel type Bullet Punch with +2 is absolutely bonkers, right? Plus Technician, obviously. That is a crazy, crazy combination. I think it will put on a ton of pressure. On top of that as well, you could potentially try and stack it with Metal Coat, but I do think Clear Amulet will be the way to go with it. But I could even see like a Terrestrial Steel, Metal Coat, Bullet Punch Technician. Like, this is crazy amounts of damage, right? 60 base power by default. Give it a Metal Coat, so 1.2 base power, right? It's probably something around 75. Then you give it the Steel type bonus, right? We'll say it's 80 actually, just so I can round it up. 120 base power, and then if it's super effective, right, you're doing even more damage. But that's 120 base power and a Bullet Punch. That's not factoring in terrestrialization, by the way. If you factor in terrestrialization is like a 1.5 multiplier, I think, which is basically 2 times. It's basically adaptability. 80 times 2, that's 160, I believe. Unless I'm mistaken. I might be mixing up the math, but anyways, you get the point. It's very, very strong. Close combat, super good coverage. It doesn't need bug coverage anymore. It is a super, super strong potent threat, and I think it's just a really good setup mon. So you'll notice, again, as I mentioned, I like to kind of go through things as they kind of have their roles. So to review, Garchomp, Roaring Moon, really strong offensive dragon types and breakers. They can do a bunch of damage, punch holes in opposing teams. Brute Bonnet, really good disruption and redirection. It can do a good job in terms of obviously, you know, doing a bunch of damage, but also, you know, mitigating that damage, redirecting, doing whatever it needs to. Arcanine and Gyarados, incredibly good support intimidators. Torkoal, Tyranitar, incredibly good weather setters. Scizor and Sylveon, very good setup mons, also really benefit off of terrestrialization. Iron Hands actually should probably be towards the top, next to Roaring Moon and Garchomp, because it is a breaker, but incredibly strong, has utility with Fake Out, has really strong close combats that can do a bunch of damage. So overall, these are the top 10 Pokemon that I see being very influential in the metagame. Obviously, if you see a Pokemon that's not in here that is good, it doesn't mean that I'm saying it's bad. It just means that, like, these are the top 10 that I think will be influential towards the meta. And obviously, the meta could completely be different from this, right? But I think it's a pretty safe bet, and I'm pretty confident that a lot of these Pokemon I'm naming will actually be good in the upcoming format. So I'm very excited for the upcoming format. Hopefully you guys enjoyed these kind of videos. I enjoy sharing these videos a lot with you guys because I just think it's really cool to talk about the new Pokemon, talk about their kits, what they get access to, especially with this new mechanic. So yeah, make sure to let me know in the comments what you think. If you would have put any Pokemon in the top 10 that I did not, that you think deserve to be there. And make sure to check out Patreon. Make sure to check out coaching, obviously. As always, if you guys would like to support me beyond here or improve at the game or both. And yeah, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it as always. And I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.